United Daughters of the Confederacy opened their archives to me, and I went, amazing stuff that they've been sending into the museum since 1958 from their ancestors, a lot of them originals. And the files start at A in the upper left-hand corner and go to Z, and I was just glancing through them, and I'm in the ends, and here's this file that says the Nimrod Newton Nash letters. And I'm going, you've got to be kidding. Who would name their son Nimrod Newton Nash? Now, you all know the answer to this, don't you? Nimrod Newton Nash Sr. Okay? So, I'm looking at 1863, and early 1863, Nimrod's up in Fredericksburg. And it's winter, which is the normal time soldiers get furloughs. And he's writing to his wife, Molly. He goes, Molly, it's rumored that General Longstreet is going to be giving furloughs to the most deserving of us. And if that's so, you can look forward to your old man coming home and seeing your big fat self. And if you're still smoking, I'll be gone as quick as light. And I'm going, Nimrod, you probably deserve your name. Why would you say to your wife your big fat self? Do you know the reason? She's pregnant. And you didn't say pregnant. Or you didn't even say with child. You just didn't say that then, so you're big fat self. And I thought the line about if you're still smoking, I'll be gone as quick as light. So obviously Molly liked her tobacco or something, and Nimrod wasn't real fond of it. Well, anyway, she was pregnant with a little boy. And so what do you suppose they named their little boy? Nimrod Newton Nash. You all are a sharp audience. This is going to be a good day. I can tell that right away. And how do you suppose Nimrod signed his letters? That's what most people guess, and that is an excellent guess, because a lot of people then did. But Nimrod was smarter than we think. He signed him Newton. Still waiting for more bodies, huh? Still hoping?
Well, I think we can go ahead. Would you like
Anytime you want to. Otherwise, they're going to hear more letters from 1863.
Where did Nimrod live?
Nimrod was from Mississippi. He was in the 11th Mississippi Infantry.
Well, if he was furloughed, he was traveling pretty far.
A long way home, and since most furloughs were only normally a couple of weeks, some of them only 10 days, it would be very difficult for Nimrod by train to get all the way back to Mississippi, see Molly, and return. And I don't know if Nimrod got the furlough or not.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to historic Yorktown, Virginia. Everybody here locally, I'm sure? Anybody from out of state or anybody? No? Okay, well, we try. We always try. I'm Dave Bearden. I'm the chair of the Sesquicentennial Committee in York County, and I'm also the staff liaison from the county for the Historical Committee. And the Historical Committee happens to be the sponsor of this event today. So once again, on behalf of the Historical Committee, I'd also like to welcome you to Historic Yorktown in this presentation. There's a couple announcements I'd like to make beforehand before we get started. First of all, when you came in this afternoon, if you haven't been here already, you should have received one of these little cards, black cards, and also one of our Civil War Sesquicentennial programs that we created back at the beginning of this year to commemorate the Civil War in York County. So I hope you got one of those, some really interesting information in there on the history of the Civil War in York County. But anyway, a couple things I wanted to mention to you. We do have a display out on the counter out front from the Historical Committee. And the Historical Committee has published 2 books on York County history. One of them is a conglomeration of more fact sheets than anything else that were created a number of years ago by Dick Ivey, who used to be the town crier for York County, or Yorktown. And the other book is also is one that just recently was completed, that Lois really shred some blood, sweat, and tears on, I think, to get a history of the black community in York County. And both of those books actually are ongoing works of progress, and the committee hopes to follow that up eventually with more books in the future. So if you're interested in those subjects, would encourage you to go out on your way out and purchase one of those books, because they're really good. They're only $20, and believe me, though, considering the number of hours and everything that went into them, they're well worth every penny of it. In the Black History book that is out there for offer, has been really endorsed by the black community. Up until this point, there was really not any books about the black history in York County. And for the committee to be able to achieve that was a real accomplishment. So I think you'll find it really interesting. And a lot of people reviewed it. A lot of people reviewed the information. So it's a very good information. So be sure and pick one of those up if you like. I'd also like to remind you of the Veterans Day ceremony that's going to be here, sponsored by the Historical Committee on the 12th of November. That's a Monday. Now, Veterans Day actually is on Sunday, but to not conflict with the church services on Sunday at noon, the Historical Committee chose to have the Veterans Day ceremony on Monday, November 12th. And that'll be at 12 noon in this room, and we encourage you to come back. It's a real good ceremony. The continuing theme, of course, of that program is Letters from War. And Tim Smith, who is a local historian, reenactor, actor, ex-school teacher, retired school teacher, all kinds of... Tim has credentials a mile long, but Tim always puts that program together. And it's very interesting because a lot of times he'll have people from the audience participate. So we encourage you to come to that as well. We're going to touch on a couple of these things. I'll be back at the end of the program, and we'll talk on a couple more. But also a reminder of the play that's coming up on the 9th through the 18th of November down at the Freight Shed here in Yorktown. Kiss My Little Girls, 1861. It's the first part of a eventual, we hope, a 4-part series. The second part will open in Gloucester County on December 6th, I think shortly after this one. So we encourage you, if you don't have tickets, Sandy's sitting back in the back, and she has tickets here today. If you'd like to purchase tickets today, you can certainly do that. You can go online and purchase them at www.bootsandkisses.com, or once again, you can go down to the gallery downstairs and purchase tickets. So it's an excellent play. As you'll see after you see this presentation, it's all factual, it's all true information, a very romantic story and a very exciting story. I think you'll get really wrapped up into it. We certainly did when we saw it last year over in Gloucester County. Finally, I want to say thank you to the museum, York County Historical Museum, who's also represented here. The museum is another one of our key partners in the play, in the presentation, and so we certainly appreciate them. If I were to mention all the other organizations and groups and individuals that are involved in this production, it would take me forever. So I will just say thanks to all those organizations, groups, and individuals that are involved. So without further ado, this gentleman that's going to be speaking this afternoon absolutely needs no introductions. After the play came out last year, I think he's made his name pretty well known around here. And he was known around here before as an author, before the play was actually made into a book, I think. So anyway, without further ado, I'll introduce Jeff Toalson. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out on this kind of brisk November day. I guess the best place to start is about 10 years ago. I was working on my first book, No Soap, No Pay, Diarrhea, Dysentery, and Desertion, which was a story of 1864-5 in the Confederacy. Most people just call it the diarrhea book. No point going into all of that other stuff. And I collected 50 women and 220 men from their diaries, letters, and journals and let them tell the story. And several of them are major voices, and then others talk a variety of different amounts of time. But one of my mid-range voices was Sergeant Nathaniel Watkins, who was in the King and Queen Heavy Artillery, and he was initially stationed in Gloucester, right across the river, if I'm pointing in the right direction. He lived in Granville County, North Carolina, and his letters are at the College of William and Mary in the Swan Library. And so I had selected 6 or 7 excerpts from some of Nathaniel's letters, and I'm in October of 1864, kind of glancing through his stuff, and here's a letter from Richard Watkins, his older brother. And Richard goes, "Bro, I'm out here in the Shenandoah Valley, and Early's chasing Sheridan, and Sheridan's chasing Early, and Early's rechasing Sheridan, and Sheridan's rechasing Early. We're all tuckered out. General Wickham's got us resting here in the valley, grazing our horses. What's up with you, bro?" This guy's a good writer, got a good sense of humor. But it was the only Richard Watkins letter to his brother that survived in Nathaniel's collection for 1864-5, which was the time frame of the diarrhea book. So I kind of filed Richard away in the back of my brain as a good voice, but there were no clues that there were any other Richard letters anywhere. And about a year later, I was up in Richmond at one of my customers, and he also happened to be very interested in the Civil War. And he said, "Have you ever read Antietam, the soldier's story?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, it takes the Battle of Antietam, or Sharpsburg, as a Southerner would call it, and he follows it from the beginning of the battle to the end on that terrible day in September, all using little diary and journal and letter entries from common soldiers. They tell the story on a timeline." I said, "Well, that sounds kind of interesting." And I found it at Mermaid Books in Williamsburg, if you know where that is, downstairs on not far from Aroma's Coffee. And we're in the early part of the battle at Sharpsburg. We're out by the Dunker Church, the end of the line that Stonewall Jackson's got. And an artillery shell explodes against a wood pile, and a piece of wood is thrown up, and it hits Lieutenant Colonel Thornton of the 3rd Virginia Cavalry in the arm and practically rips his arm off. And the fellow telling the story is Richard Watkins. Quickly to the footnotes. It says, "Richard Watkins Collection, Virginia Historical Society." So the next time I was in Richmond, I pop into the Historical Society, and a nice lady there at the front desk, and Catherine, who I didn't know then, got to know very well, Catherine says, "How can I help you?" I said, "Well, could I look at the Richard Watkins papers?" Magic of computers, which we were just talking about how good I am on computers. She says, "Well, Mr. Toalson, which box would you like to start with?" Holy, and well, you know, Bess Truman used to criticize Harry if he used a certain word with horse, starts with S, ends with T. Preferred that Harry say horse manure or something like that. Well, so anyway, I said, holy, well, anyway. So we'll forget about Harry Truman. He's not involved in this story, really. So I said, well, let's start with box 1. And she brings out box 1, and it's got a synopsis with it. It says, box 1 of 5 boxes, containing 310 letters and other documents. And I was hoping for 15 letters. I would have been doing cartwheels for 15 letters. So I quickly asked if I could look at boxes 2, 3, 4, and 5. Because looking at the early ones in box 1, practically every other letter is from Mary. And I looked at the other boxes, and this continues. Richard's a good writer, but the rarest thing in Civil War literature is a major collection between a husband and wife. Because women's letters go to the front, and 2 things happen to them. Campfires and toilet paper. And they don't survive. Richard saved every one of Mary's letters, and anytime anybody was going back for a fresh horse, on furlough, rotating chaplains, whatever it happened to be, he would send another bundle home to Mary, and she would put them in the trunk, along with his letters, and save them. There have been 7 collections of husband and wife letters published. There have been 16,000 books published on Abraham Lincoln. A huge quantity published on Gettysburg and General Lee. 7 husband and wife collections, 4 Confederate and 3 Union. So, women's letters are just rare. And I just couldn't believe that nobody had attacked this. They'd been sitting there for 80 years. They let me work with the originals. Only 1 letter out of 310 documents was illegible. And it was illegible when Mary got it. It had gotten wet and the ink had smeared. Richard also had the brilliant idea of writing 1 letter in pencil while on horseback. Let's just say he only tried that once. Richard might be a little slow, but he's not stupid. All right, well, I need to tell you a little bit about Richard and Mary, I suppose. They were both born and raised in Prince Edward County, Virginia, which is where Farmville is. They were married in 1858. In 1858, Mary is 18 years old, and Richard is 32. He wanted to marry up, I guess that's the best way to say it, and Mary was from a prosperous family, and so it would be fairly, that would be an upward move for Richard. But he felt in order to propose to her, first she had to be 18, but he also had to be fairly prosperous. He'd gone to law school at the University of Virginia, and he'd been practicing law now since 1947. and had built up a nice little practice. 1847, excuse me, it's a little hard to do that, time transporting and so forth. So he'd established himself, and he had a 250-acre farm. So they got married in 1858. The 1860 census comes along. Richard is 34, Mary is 20, and they already have their first child, Emmy, who is 1. The census shows that he has $10,000 worth of real property, which is his 250 acres of land and his house. And he has $25,000 of personal property, which is his 23 slaves. So he's a fairly prosperous small farmer. 13 of those slaves came with Mary as her dowry. So he not only got a wonderful wife, he also doubled the amount of Negroes to work on his property and his farm. Well, as you know, things started happening in 1861, and the neighbors in Prince Edward County enlisted in infantry units. Make sure I don't mess this up. Is there an antenna or something that pops up, or is?
Yeah. You're okay.
There you go.
All right. Okay. Still working? Okay.
Yeah.
Sort of, kind of? That's good. All right, we don't want to end up losing your recording or whatever. Do you realize that this desk has been shrinking?
Clothes have a way of doing
I
that.
know clothes do that. I don't understand that exactly. Well, anyway, Richard and most of his neighbors enlisted in what would become the Prince Edward Troop of the 3rd Virginia Cavalry. And just to give you an idea of things, the 3rd Virginia Cavalry, which is what they are going to become part of, is made up of 10 companies. A company of Confederate cavalry is normally about 75 men, and a regiment is normally about 750 if things are at full strength. So just kind of keep 75 and 750 in your brain. The counties that provided troops for the 3rd Virginia Cavalry were Halifax County, which provided 2 troops, Cumberland, Nottoway, Mecklenburg, Dinwiddie, and of course Prince Edward. So we're all over in what's called the south side or south central counties. And then the Charles City Troop from Charles City County, the James City Cavalry from Williamsburg, the New Kent Troop from New Kent County, and a company from the cities of Newport News and Hampton. So they had Tidewater companies and South Central companies. Now, if you were counting, you said, Jeff, you just named 11 companies. And I did. There were 2 company I's. The Dinwiddie Troop and the James City Cavalry were both company I. The Confederate Army reorganized in late April, early May of 1862, just about the time of the Battle of Williamsburg. And the Dinwiddie Troop became the company I of the 3rd Virginia Cavalry. The James City Cavalry was transferred to the 5th Virginia Cavalry. So that kind of gives you a background of things as we start into this conflict and the status of Richard and Mary and their little girl Emmy, and then they just had a brand new little baby, Minnie, who was born in 1861. Did you hear that? I think I heard a horse. Just a second. Let's go check and see. I think it could be Richard Watkins. I saw you riding up on your wagon just as I was coming up on Fitz. I've been up at the clerk's office doing some work up in the PE county clerk's office, and what do you think? Now, I was at the Haberdashers the other day in Farmville, and the clerk came up to me and said, Mr. Watkins, all of the lawyers and all of the government people in Richmond, this is the type of hat they're wearing. If you want to be in style, sir, this is what you need. Well, I wasn't sure I needed a new hat, but he was a salesman, and I bought it, and Mary really likes it, so I'm still not totally convinced, but anyway, it's the style of the time. And well, why don't we go sit on the porch? If you noticed, Purnell and Mary are walking down over the hill there. I think they're going down to the watermelon patch, and they're going to get a big watermelon for us to have after supper. So we can just go sit on the porch and visit a little bit, and talk about things. And until they get back. You know, I was thinking as I was riding up on Fitz, and yes, he is named after Fitzhugh Lee, who commanded me for most of the great unpleasantness. I was thinking, it's been 25 years since the great unpleasantness ended. And in some ways, it seems like just yesterday. And in other ways, it seems so very, very long ago. We were so green and so excited when this all started that we got our orders to go up the other side of Richmond to Ashland, and we mounted up and we rode out of Prince Edward County, and we got up around Amelia, and well, there were ladies. They were out standing along the sidewalks and the road, and they were offering us lemonade and ice water and other things to drink, and some of the men had too much of those other things to drink, and we were pretty happy by the time we got up to Manchester and in the Richmond area, and there were folks there doing the same thing. And the next day we got on up to Ashland, where they were going to teach us how to be cavalry. And they named that city wrong. It should have been called Ashesland, because it was so dirty and dusty. But we had this big area on this farm right in town where we camped, and we had these big tents, sleep 4 and 6 men, and we had cots, and we had places for our trunks and all our clothing and everything, and we had corrals for our horses, and there were barns, and we thought this was the way cavalry, when we're going to live in conflict. We were still a little green. Well, they quickly discovered, of course I think they knew, I mean we were all from Prince Edward County, that since I was a lawyer I knew how to read and write. And they quickly said that Private Watkins could be the quartermaster for the company, and they made me the quartermaster for the Prince Edward troop, and so I got relieved from drills and stuff, and that was sort of good. I didn't have to ride around on horses learning how to answer bugle calls and all that sort of thing. Instead, I had to get all the corn and the wheat and the men's rations and all that thing, and that took me from sunrise to sunset every day doing that. Well, one day we needed to go into Richmond to get some supplies, so I picked a couple of boys to go along with me, and they gave us a wagon and some horses, and we went in and picked up this stuff, and on the way back we stopped at the parade ground in Richmond, because there was a troop of Texans out there drilling. And they looked sharp. They were marching back and forth, and they had this great big officer. I mean, he was big. He was walking might even not even describe what he was doing. And then this gentleman comes riding in on a gray horse, and he had on a gray suit of clothes, and he rode up toward this big fella and gets right up by him, and he says, "Wigfall, how are you and your Texans doing?" This big fella, he all of a sudden just snaps to attention and goes, "Mr. President Davis, sir, we're doing just fine. Thank you for honoring us with your presence." I said, "Well, it's my pleasure to be out here, Wigfall. Is there anything you and your men need?" He said, "No, sir, Mr. President, we're all doing just fine." That was the president of the Confederacy. And he's just a little bit of a fellow. He's smaller than I am. And he looked frail and careworn. You know, thinking back, I never saw him. That was the only time I ever saw President Davis during the entire war. And there were no problems at all in 1861 compared to what this man faced the rest of the time. I can't imagine what he must have looked like by 1865. Well, they trained us for a while there, and then they decided, where are my manners? If Mary was here, she'd be so upset with me. You're sitting here on the porch visiting, and I haven't offered you any blackberry bounce. You know, Mary's mother, Mama DeP, taught all the sisters how to make blackberry bounce. Now, you all know how to make your fruit wines. It doesn't matter whether it's apricots or blackberries or cherries, and you put the sugar with them, and you bruise the fruit, and you know, bottle them close and put them away to ferment, and then you get the blackberry wine. But the problem with fruit wines is they're just unbelievably sweet. Oh, you can hardly drink them. So it's what you mix with your blackberry wine that is is the secret. Now, this is a bottle of Sister Lavalette's blackberry bounce. Now, I don't tell Mary this because it upsets her a bit, but Sister Lavalette makes much better blackberry bounce than Mary does. And Sister Lavalette won't tell me her secret, but I think I know what it is. She puts 50% brandy with her blackberry bounce. Yeah, Mama passed away a few years ago, but the recipe goes on, so we thank you for joining us tonight for a little supper, and here's to Mama and her blackberry bounce. Oh, Sister Lavalette made a good batch here. Mary's teaching our girls how to make blackberry bounce too, and I'm going to tell Sister Lavalette's secret. Well, after we'd been in Ashland a while, they decided we needed to go to Yorktown. So they sent us down to West Point, and they put us on boats, and we came down the river, and they put us ashore at Yorktown. It's a dumpy, dirty little town. And then they took us about 2 miles outside of this little dump of a town, and they set up our camp. So we were 2 miles from good water, but we had a few creeks and stuff. And then we're going to spend, as it turns out, I didn't know at the time, we're going to spend about 8 months watching McClellan. He didn't move very quickly. It was pretty easy to watch him. But, so, one morning I had finished the duties with being quartermaster, and the troop was off over on the names of some of these rivers in that part of the state were really weird. This one started with a P and it had a Q in it, and it was like Q-O, P. I have no idea. P-U-O, Q-U-O-O, S-O-N something. No idea how to pronounce this silly river, but that's where the boys were. So I asked the captain if we could go down and visit the boys. He said, well, as long as you've got your quartermaster duties done, you can take your two fellows and go on down. And we rode down here and got down to this river, and well, it was over a mile wide. It's a tidal kind of river that ran out into the Chesapeake Bay, and there was this fella out there standing up in a boat. Can't do that around where I'm from. And he has these tong-like things, and it turned out that he was getting oysters and clams. And Captain Berkeley said to us, Richard, you boys have to stay with us for supper. He says, because we're having stewed oysters, stewed clams, stewed chicken, stewed tomatoes, cornbread. And, well, he didn't have to go into that long list. We were definitely going to stay with him for supper. And we had a marvelous meal, and now we've been soldiers for several months, and we're beginning to think this is all there is to being soldiers. This is the kind of food you get to eat as soldiers. Except that in about 9 months, don't know it at the time, but we're going to be on our way to Sharpsburg, Maryland, Antietam. And there's going to be like almost a 2-week period there where all I'm going to get to eat is apples and green corn that I pick from fields and stuff as I go by. And here we are eating stewed oysters, stewed chicken, tomatoes. Well, I got a letter from Mary, and she said, Richard, I'm kind of lonely here on our place, just me and the little girls, the overseer and the Negroes, so I'm going to move over to Mama's place, and I'm going to take the ducks and the Minnie's cradle and some of the bedclothes, and then I'll come over here I'll either walk over or come over on the horse 3 or 4 times a week and check with the overseer and check the crop and write you letters and let you know what's happening. But at least there I'll have Mama and the sisters to visit with, and it'll be much better. And of course I thought that was a really good idea. She'd be happier, and I wrote back that I thought that was a great idea. Mary did a really good job of taking charge of the farm after I left, and she and the various overseers would keep me well posted on things that were happening, and basically after a short time she was making all the decisions and doing a fine job of running our farm. Well, finally McClellan got to moving and got down around Yorktown, and our generals they figured that maybe we needed to get out of there, and this was just about the end of April, and they were reorganizing the Army, and all of a sudden I got promoted to second lieutenant. And so I'm no longer the quartermaster. And the first job they gave me as we were retreating toward Williamsburg, they dispatched me with all the wounded of the regiment to go to some place called Kings Mill Bluff or Kings Mill Wharf or something up near Williamsburg. And we were going to evacuate all our sick and wounded by water to Richmond. And let me tell you, that was one of the saddest sights of the entire war. It was raining. It was cold. There were almost 2,000 sick and wounded men laying out on the ground waiting for transportation. I got our guys off fairly quickly and stayed to help with the others, but we were there 2 days with those poor fellows in the rain, and then we moved over to Williamsburg to help with things during the battle there, and then we were in the rear guard between our army and McClellan's army as we retreated back toward Richmond. Now that took 30 days. And in that time, all of our horses were starving to death and broken down. And half of our boys were in the hospital, and the other half of them were back in Prince Edward County getting fresh mounts. And we missed all of the 7 days and everything, and Stewart's ride around McClellan. And in fact, the Army left to head up toward what would be the Battle of Second Manassas before we were even all out of the hospital and ready to go. And we were riding, trying to catch up with them. We got to out near Louisa. There were 60 men from the 3rd Virginia Cavalry that either they were broken down or their horses were broken down. Now, all of those weren't from our company, but quite a few of them were. And we finally caught up with the Army at Warrenton, and then we were off in September to Maryland. On the battlefield at Antietam, where Lieutenant Colonel Thornton died, we had 12 men from Company K. 12 out of our 70-some men made it as far as Antietam. Then we retreated back into Northern Virginia around Martinsburg and went into camp up there to kind of rest and recover. And we were, as I think I already mentioned to you, we ate a lot of corn and apples. We were camped in a big, beautiful field. There's one walnut tree out in the middle of the field, grazing our horses. I'm writing a letter to Mary, and all of a sudden I say, Mary, Mel Arvin's got his rifle, and he's out shooting up into that walnut tree. Thought it was rather odd. Went back to writing, and a little bit later, Hal Edmonds has gone out there, and he's joined him. The two of them are shooting up into this tree. Went back to writing, a couple of later. 30 men have got this tree surrounded. And they're all shooting up into this tree. And I finally said, well, excuse me, Mary, I'm going to take a break from this letter. I got to go find out what it is that they're shooting at. Get out. Do you know what they were shooting at? A squirrel. A squirrel. Now, of course, they've been eating corn and apples too. They want some meat for breakfast. Well, I went back and sat down, and sure enough, a little bit later, Mel and Hal are out skinning their squirrel. They're going to have meat for breakfast. And I'm telling Mary about that, and it was another couple of days, I think, before the wagons arrived so we could go back to eating our salt pork and cornbread and bacon and stuff that good Southern boys are used to eating. Well, you know, I got to thinking while this was happening, what if there was a Yankee spy out there in those trees watching us? Now, we tried to create this reputation that one Reb was worth 4 Yanks because we were such good shots. And if they're watching 30 Rebs shooting at a squirrel, what are they thinking? Because that math means that one squirrel is worth 30 Rebs. Of course, if our thinking is correct, one squirrel's worth 120 Yanks. Well, anyway, I didn't want to think on that a whole lot. Here's to Mama. Disease was a terrible thing during the war. We had 2 epidemics that went through the area. In 1863, we had a big whooping cough epidemic that swept through Prince Edward County. And I got a letter from Mary, and she goes, Richard, we got Dr. Owens over here at the house now. Mama's got 60-some people sick on her place, all the little children and all the older people, including our little children. And over at our place, we got 13 or 14 people sick, and a couple of the little babies are very sick, little Negro babies. Dr. Owens doesn't think there's a whole lot he can do for them. He says, but cousin self, he came up and he brought me some snake oil root. And he said he'd already taken snake oil root down to our place, and he'd also put snake oil root around the necks of all the little babies on Mama's place. And he said, I brought some for you to put around your little girls' necks because it'll make it go easier on them. So I put the snake oil root around Emmy and Minnie and little Mary, so all three little girls, and it did seem to help a little bit. And then she continued that letter later that evening, and Richard, I'm up here finishing this letter by candlelight. Everybody's asleep. It's quiet. The windows are open. The only sound you can hear is whooping in the house and whooping in the Negro quarters and whooping in the yard. And Richard, some of them are whooping so hard it sounds like they're going to pull their insides out. Well, fortunately, our little girls made it through, but on Mama's place and our place, we lost 8 little children. And we were probably fortunate compared to some of the other places. Now, as you know, my brother lived down in Granville County. And in late 1863, the Confederate government came to the community, as they often did. I mean, they came to our area too, and they'd come to your farm and say, I need 2 Negroes for a 30-day work party. I need 1 from you. I need 2 from your place. And they'd get together a work party of 100 Negroes. We would select an overseer to go with them to make sure they were treated properly, housed properly, fed properly. And then they would send them off to work on fortifications, railroad repair, whatever it happened to be. Well, they did this in Granville County. They needed a work party to go up to Weldon, to work on the Weldon Railroad up by Roanoke Rapids. And they loaded up in Granville County, and they headed up to Weldon, and when the train got there, 90 of the 100 Negroes were very, very sick. And they turned the train around, and they sent it right back to Granville County. And 90 of those 100 slaves died, but not before they got back to their farms. Now, my brother's oldest boy was named Charlie, and he was the same age as our Emmy, so he's about 3 or 4. And he comes in after lunch and says, Mama, I'm not feeling real well. I need to take a nap. Little 4-year-old boys do not come in after lunch and want to take a nap. Well, he had a high fever by supper time. He was delirious by midnight. And Charlie was dead before morning. The doctors had a terrible time figuring out what it was, but they finally figured out it was a very virulent form of typhus. And it was either flea-borne or lice-borne. And it killed hundreds of people in Granville County in the span of 4 or 5 days. And then it just disappeared. Fortunately, Minnie, his wife, Richard, or Nathaniel's wife, and their little girl were just fine. They weren't bothered at all. Charlie was gone, and my brother was just torn apart. Just terrible stuff when these big epidemics would get going. Well, that's kind of depressing. We need to talk about something a little besides Mama's blackberry bananas. I'm definitely going to tell Emmy and Minnie how to make that. Let's talk about my horses. I had I probably went through 10 different horses during the war. The Confederate government was worthless at trying to get us grain to feed for our horses, and they were always breaking down. But I had 4 favorite horses. I had Henry, Magruder, named after General Magruder, John Wesley, named after the Methodist, preacher guy, and Lizzie Lee, my favorite mare. Now, I had a horse killed under me at Kelly's Ford, and I had one badly wounded we had to put down at Winchester in 1864. But those were my 4 favorite horses. Well, along in October, I think it was, of 1863, 1862. Mind goes after a while. We were camped up near Orange Courthouse, and Fitz Lee liked to give us these orders: cook 3 days rations and be ready to move out in the morning. And that's what he did. And so we cooked our 3 days rations, and we mounted up, and first thing in the morning we rode out across the Raccoon River and up into northern Virginia, and we got up now a little town called Aldie, or Aldie, and all of a sudden here comes a whole mess of Union cavalry. Well, we decided to charge them, and they decided to charge us, and so we went in, and we were mixing it up and everything, and all of a sudden I got hit up the side of the head. And I'm kind of on Henry there, and I'm trying to figure out what is going on, and my brain was clear enough and figured, Richard, if you don't do something, you're going to get killed. So I fell off of him. And our boys whipped their boys and ran them off the field, and do you know what Henry did? He deserted and joined the Union cavalry. Now, do you know what the Confederate government gives you if your horse deserts and joins the Union cavalry? Nothing. But there is good news. General Stewart, always liked General Stewart, he said, you've been a brave soldier and you've been wounded, you deserve a 30-day furlough. And that was just a bump on the side of the head, but you never turned down a 30-day furlough from General Stewart. So I got to go home and be with Mary and the girls for 30 days and work on the farm and do different things. And actually, little Mary benefited from that, because little Mary wasn't around when I went home on furlough, if you understand what I'm saying. And then I went back, and we're back in camp, and I get a letter from Mary. She goes, darling, it was wonderful having you home for 30 days, and the girls were so happy to see you, and it just seems so empty and lonely around here now that you're gone. She says, I'm sitting up here in the bedroom writing, because it's really noisy down in the parlor where all the sisters are and the girls. She says, all of a sudden I hear these little steps, little footsteps coming up the stairs. Now you all know how little girls go upstairs. They put an arm up on the railing and they come up the side and they do it again. And so you can hear this pat pat, pat pat, pat pat. And then coming down the hall you hear pat pat, pat pat, pat pat. And then little Minnie comes around the door into the room, and she's got a butter knife up over her head, and she goes, Papa got cut on the side of the head with a Yankee knife. Papa got cut on the side of the head with a Yankee knife. And I said, well, yes, darling, I know, but Papa's fine. You've seen him. He's okay. Well, that's true, Mama. So, but I tell you what, Minnie, I'm writing a letter to Papa. Is there anything you'd like to say to him? He says, well, yes. Tell Papa howdy, and that Minnie's been a good little girl. Okay, darling, I'll do that. Now, why don't you go back downstairs and with the sisters so I can finish my letter to Papa? Okay, Mama. Now, you all know this. Little girls go downstairs differently than they come upstairs. I don't know why this is. It's a mystery of life. They go downstairs with 2 arms. Come up with 1. So 2 arms, tut, 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 tut. And then in the distance, down in the parlor, you can hear, Papa got cut on the side of the head with the Yankee knife. So now I know what all the noise was down in the parlor, Richard. Well, when we sit around the campfires at night, we have to read the funny parts of letters to our buddies. And everybody is roaring with laughter. And, of course, Richard, I got kidded for a while about getting cut on the side of the head by a Yankee knife. Well, anyway, we've been back in camp maybe 2 weeks, and Fitz got one of those burrs under his saddle again. We got fixed 3 days rations, get ready to depart in the morning on a long patrol. So we fixed our rations, and early the next morning, mid-December, off we go across the Raccoon and up toward Fredericksburg, and we camped that night. There's snow on the ground, and the next morning we're up early and we're heading out. And all of a sudden, up over the ridge in front of us, a whole bunch of Union cavalry. Fitz outsmarted these boys. He had the 2nd Virginia Cavalry out in front of us, and he had us hiding in the woods. So the Yankee cavalry, this is Pennsylvania, this Michigan cavalry, blonde-headed fellow in command of the unit, not real bright. Anyway, they come charging down across here, and the 2nd retreats back into the woods, and they think they've got us, and then we counterattack. Well, I'm on Magruder. He is my favorite horse, and I have just about caught up with the Yank, and I'm getting ready to whack a Yank, and Magruder stops, and he launches me heel over head over this big pile of brush into this slush and mud and snow and water, and I land on my saber goes one way and my hat another, and I'm trying to, what in the heck is going on? And I finally get myself picked up and put back together. The Union cavalry's in full retreat, going up the hill and leading the retreat, his black mane blowing in the breeze, riderless. Yeah, it's Magruder. He has deserted and joined the Union cavalry. And I got 2 thoughts on this. I think Henry and Magruder were both very smart horses, is what I really think. Because they looked at these other horses, the Yankee horses, and said, they're better fed than we are. We're out of here. I think that's what they really did. But there was a good thing on this one, too. Some Yankee cavalry officer or something had lost his horse, and Fitz gave me this beautiful iron gray Charger that had belonged to him with a new saddle and new blankets. So I did lose my favorite horse, but I got a good replacement horse out of it. Mercy goodness. Folks quite often ask what the worst battle or the hardest campaign of the war is, and I don't like to talk about the battles much, but I can tell you what the hardest campaign of the war was. In late 1863, we were camped near Charlottesville, and Union General Averill went on a raid up the valley, past Stanton, and then on south somewhere. And our job was to go catch him. And so Fitz gave us the order to cook 3 days' rations. And we went over the Blue Ridge Mountains at night, came down into Waynesboro the next morning, and then we took off in pursuit of Averill. Well, I can tell you that it doesn't matter whether it's Yankee cavalry pursuing Confederate cavalry, or in our case, Confederate cavalry chasing Union cavalry. If they have a 30-mile head start, you're not going to catch them unless they happen to double back on their trail right toward you. But we tried. We went over to Stanton. We turned south toward Lexington, went to Lexington, then we went west toward Clifton Forge, caught the Jackson River, and where it starts the James River, we came down to Buchanan and turned over toward Fincastle. Got to Fincastle, thought maybe they'd gone to the depot there to tear it up. No sign of them there. We turned and went toward Roanoke. Nothing in Roanoke. Got to Salem. They burned the Salem yards. They burned the depot, burned a bunch of cars, a couple of trestles, and gone on. So we continued our pursuit and then headed back toward Fincastle. Went out to Clifton Forge again, and we continued west to white sulfur, blue sulfur, green sulfur, any sulfur we could find out there, but we couldn't find Averill. Turned around and came back through Greenville, back to Stanton. We went down the valley to Newmarket, a little beyond, turned west up over the Allegheny Mountains into Hardy and a couple of other counties, and finally stopped. This had been a 30-day chase. Came back to the base of the Alleghenies, and for whatever reason, Fitz decided we were going to cross the Alleghenies at night. It was raining, sleeting, no moon, couldn't see anything. I was riding John Westwood. Started out trying to ride him, couldn't even find the trail. So I got off John Wesley, grabbed his bridle, thought, I'll lead John Wesley. You can't lead a Methodist. So figured there's only one way to do this. We've tried two options. I grabbed a hold of John Wesley's tail. You can follow a Methodist. And so somehow I followed John Wesley up over the mountain and down the other side, slipping, sliding, grabbing onto things. And we made it down. And a few days later, we were back in our camp in Charlottesville. We've been gone 30 days. We never fired a shot in anger. We had lost one man who drowned in the Jackson River. We had left Charlottesville with 253 men and officers in the 3rd Virginia Cavalry. Came back with 53. The rest were all broken down horses or broken down soldiers scattered over all of those hundreds of miles that we just discussed. We were weeks recuperating the command and getting people and horses back. But the best thing about it when we got there is we had mail waiting for us. And I had a Christmas letter from Mary. It is my favorite letter of the entire war. I was up at the Prince Edward Courthouse the other day, visiting the clerk, doing some work, and they have a new machine there. It's called a Remington writing machine. And it has these keys, and these arms come up with letters on them. And he'd gone to Remington writing school and uses these 4 fingers, and it's just like a little printing press. And I didn't want to carry Mary's original letter around with me, and I asked him if he could put this on this Remington 2 writing machine and copy the letter. And I mean, it's just like amazing. The machine costs $105. Now, Watkins, and Brock could use one of these machines, but I don't think we can afford $105 because let's just say there's one Mr. Watkins and one Mr. Brock in Watkins, and Brock who are not very good handwriters. Well, anyway, this is the letter that was waiting for me. December 25th, 1863. 'Tis the night before Christmas, and all through the house not a creature is stirring, not even a mouse, except one, me. My darling husband, it seems so very long since I heard from you, and I thought perhaps you would drop in from winter quarters, but willing to dispel that illusion this morning with the news that you were hot in pursuit of April. Emmy and Minnie hung up their stockings before going to bed, and I've just filled them with some apples, ground peas, and some candy, and some cakes that Mrs. Baker sent. Our Negro men have been over to pay for their corn and get their overcoats. So they made 18 barrels of corn this year in their personal gardens. Christmas morning. Little Mary waked up last night and would not go back to sleep again until I went to bed with her, so I could not finish my letter. She and Minnie both sleep with me. Minnie sleeps at the foot to keep my foots warm, she says, and she has a regular little stove. You never saw children so delighted as Emmy and Minnie were at finding their stockings full on Christmas morning. Emmy was rather hoping for a China doll, but I told her the Yankees would not let Santa Claus bring such things through the lines right now. I asked Minnie how she got so black with soot. She said she'd been looking up the chimney to see if Santa Claus was up there. Darling, I can't help but thinking about you shivering in the cold, and I can hardly enjoy a good fire when I think that you're perhaps suffering. We are all well here. Little Mary just had her first tooth. I want to send this letter to the depot now. Goodbye for the present. Hope to see you at home as soon as you get here. Begin to think about your going back already. Your home, Mary. Please send me some stamps when you come through Richmond. I love it. Carry it everywhere with me. It means more to me than I can begin to say. Did I tell you about the court-martial duty I got sent on? Well, I got some orders to report to General Wickham's headquarters out around Louisa Courthouse, I think it was. And I rode out there and reported to the general, and I thought I was going to be on the jury for a court-martial. And I go in and see him, and he says, "Captain, you'll be the defense counsel." And I said, well, General, I thought I was here to serve on the jury. He says, "Captain, you will be the defense counsel." "Yes, sir." So I checked with my client, and we kind of figured out a strategy, and we went in the next morning, and they had convened the court-martial, and I kind of looked over at the jury, and then I stood up and said, "Mr. President, can I address the court?" He says, "Certainly, counsel." I said, "Sir, according to military regulations, the men sitting in judgment of the accused must be of equal or greater rank. This panel of officers is improperly composed. I move for immediate dismissal of charges." He goes, "Captain, you are 100% correct. Case dismissed." So you see, Mary, I can still be a lawyer. Well, I was sitting by the fire the next morning with the gentleman I was defending and a couple of his junior officers, and General Wickham comes by and he says, "Captains," didn't invite the lieutenants, but he says, "Captains, join me for breakfast." Well, you never turn down a general when he invites you to breakfast. So we hopped up and we went down there. Do you know that the general has a cow and 13 chickens that travel with him? He has fresh eggs and fresh milk every morning for breakfast. Generals don't eat at all like privates and lieutenants and captains do. Well, as you know, I got wounded at Tom's Brook in October of 1864. Took a saber blow in the wrist, and it broke some little bones and things in here. My left hand has never worked quite right since, but fortunately I write right-handed, so. But that finished me for service because I wasn't able to hold the reins and do everything. I couldn't do it one-handed. So I recuperated at home, and then in April, when Richmond fell and all the armies were coming west, I knew they were going to come right through Prince Edward County. So I took Mary and the girls, and we went to Danville, where her sister Maria lived, and we figured that was a good place to hole up or whatever until this all got settled out. And that's where I actually signed my parole papers and so forth. And we returned to the farm in late May, I think it was, and I wrote my brother, and I said, "Nathaniel, there's nothing left." He says, "They left the house, and my law library is still there, but there's no chickens, there's no cows, there's no cotton, there's no grain, there's nothing. Everything's gone." He said, "All I have left is one duck and one peacock, and I can't get them to mate." Look, there comes Mary and Purnell. He has got the biggest watermelon I think I've ever seen on his shoulder. We're going to get in big trouble if we don't go immediately and wash up. Because Mary will be very upset with us if we're not ready to eat when she gets here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Once again, for Jeff Toalson as Richard Watkins. Thank you.
Questions? I can ask the first question. They have Emmy, Minnie, and Little Mary. 2 years after the war, they have to sell their farm to settle their debts. And in 1867, about the same year they sell their farm, little Virginia is born. So they now have 4 little girls. In 1870, Mary and Virginia both die of diphtheria, and they have a double funeral. In 1873, Asa, their son, is born. In 1891, Emmy is Minnie is married and living up in the Arlington, Alexandria area with her husband. They have one little girl. She's pregnant. She gives birth to a little boy. Minnie and the little boy both get pneumonia, die within 2 days of each other. Richard and Mary attend a double funeral for their daughter and their grandson. Richard will pass away in 1905 at age 80. Mary will live until 1923, when she'll be 83. And then 6 years later, Emmy and Asa, the surviving 2 children, will donate the 300 and some letters to the Virginia Historical Society. And they will wait 80 years for it. Just simply amazing. And so I get to tell you this story all because the gentleman who was writing the book on Antietam and another gentleman who was doing some research on the Shenandoah Valley campaign of 1864 used a couple of Richard's things. They looked at Mary and they didn't change directions. So I thank them.
Richard,
I can
see, I already feel you're Richard. Jeff, did you not, you reunite the letters with the
family? Right. Now, a year after the book came out, I got an email just before Christmas from a Richard Watkins. I thought Rod Serling was involved. Because all the research we've done and everything we had from both Prince Edward County, the census reports, Asa, the son, and his wife, Dorothea, for some reason just kind of disappeared in the census rolls. I still haven't found them. But they had 2 children. They had an Asa, and they had a daughter, Julia. And this fellow from upstate New York is writing, he says, I'm doing research on my ancestors, and all of a sudden here's a book on Richard Watkins. It says, and he could be my great-grandfather. My father was named Asa Watkins. His father was named Asa Watkins. And I'm just not sure if this is the Asa Watkins that was the son of Richard Watkins. Your Richard Watkins, my Richard Watkins. Can you tell me how he died? Well, I knew how he died. Asa ended up as the head of the English department at Hampden Sydney, out in Prince Edward County. And he was shoveling snow one wet winter day and walked to the post office on the campus with his daughter Julia, and on the way back, he only made it about halfway back. He started bending over, having trouble breathing. He made it home, dropped over in the parlor and died. And I emailed this to Richard. Got a 1-word email back, Eureka. It's the right Asa, Richard, etc., etc. He provided the pictures that are in the current book. He provided another few letters. They helped fill in the blanks. And of course, for my part, they did not know the letters existed. I handed them their history. Pretty amazing.
More questions?
Yes.
What about the relationship between Mary Watkins and Mary Watkins, the director?
Okay. None. It's Mary Watkins and Mary Watson.
It's just spelled differently, I think.
Or Watkins, excuse me. Yeah, it's Watkins and Watkins. They're not related. They're a T instead of a D. She's a D and they're T's.
Okay.
So they're not related, but it sure looks like they ought to be.
Okay. Yeah, I thought that was really...
That would be really bizarre.
Okay, we would certainly, I'll interrupt them and say we would certainly invite everybody, if you don't have tickets for the play, Sammy's going to be set up out in the little alcove out here to sell some tickets if you're interested. And come with us next week, beginning on the 9th of November, all the way to the 18th, and hear more of the story of Richard and Mary Watkins. So once again, thank you very much.
This will be dealing with the first year, which is mostly the Yorktown, Williamsburg. It ends in Williamsburg, And so it deals with that first part of the war. And then the second play in December will take it through the end of 1862 till Papa got cut on the side of the head with the Yankee knife. And then we'll proceed on from there. But they're both wonderful plays, and I think you really enjoy them if you haven't seen them yet. They do a wonderful job of bringing Richard and Mary to life. And it's in the round, only 50 people in the theater. It's extremely personal.
If you'd like more information about the sponsors of the play, once again, Bonnie Carwhite from the museum is here, Lois Winter from the Historical Committee. Another person I have mentioned, Myra McCain, one of our key sponsors from the United Daughters of the Confederacy Peninsula Campaign chapter is here. So that UDC, we have several people from the UDC here. So anyway, once again, thank you very much for coming. Stay around if you'd like to talk to Jeff for a few minutes. I'm sure he'll stay around for a few minutes. And he is signing books
I'll be
downstairs.
signing books downstairs,
Yeah.
Both Boots and Kisses, and also if you need a copy of Diarrhea or a case of diarrhea.